Hi. My cruel parents kicked me out of the house when I was 14 because I was weak. But years later, I live in rural Arkansas where almost everyone works on farms. Children start working at an early age, and only a few parents understand the importance of education and allow their children to study. I was unlucky with my parents in this regard. My father doesn't own any land, but he buys produce from different farmers and sells it at the market. I have a younger brother named Toby, who is 10 years old. When I was in high school, even though I didn't fully understand the value of education, I knew I wanted to be something more than just a farmer. But my father shattered my hopes. 2 days after my 14th birthday, my father called me into his room and told me it was time to quit school. He said he had made an agreement with his friend, the owner of a huge farm, and that I would now become one of his hired workers. I was 14, thin and weak, not as physically fit as my peers, and I didn't even know if I could develop that kind of strength. You could say it was because my parents didn't feed me and my brother well. The news was hard for me to take, but I had no say in the matter and couldn't challenge my parents' decision. So I said goodbye to my education. On my first day of work on the farm, I lost consciousness from exhaustion. I cannot describe all the commotion that ensued after I was revived. The farm owner drove me home and told my parents what had happened, but they were more concerned about when I would be able to return to work. My father assured his friend that there was no need to worry, as I would be back working in the fields the next day. I was hurt by his indifference, but his friend's response was unexpectedly comforting. He refused to take me back to the farm, considering me unsuitable for such work. My father tried to change his mind, but he didn't want to get involved in problems. He left, and my parents were angry with me for several days. My younger brother watched all this with horror, knowing that the same fate awaited him in 4 years, if not sooner. My father tried to find me another job, but rumors that I had fainted on the farm had already spread throughout the neighborhood, and no one wanted to hire me. My home became a living hell for me. My parents looked at me with irritation because, in their opinion, I couldn't do anything right. They cut my food portions and then complained that I was eating too much anyway. If something was out of place, they always blamed me. I even thought that soon they would start complaining that I was breathing too much air in the house. I thought it would be better to go back to school than just sit around doing nothing. One evening, I approached my parents with this suggestion and immediately realized what a bad idea it was. I walked into their room, and their faces contorted with disgust at the sight of me. I said I needed to talk about something important, and my father told me to hurry up. I began to explain that instead of sitting around at home doing nothing, it would be better for me to go back to school. My mother got out of bed and walked past me as if she were going to the bathroom. But as I continued to speak, there was a loud slap, and I saw a flash before my eyes. She had hit me in the face. I staggered, and she threatened to deal with me if I didn't shut up immediately. She yelled that I was too weak to work and be useful to the family, but when it came to school, I suddenly had strength. Then she turned to my father and said that she had suspected me of cheating all along. They decided that I had simply pretended to faint in order to avoid hard work. My father gave me an ultimatum. I had to leave the house every day and look for work. Otherwise, he would throw me out onto the street. If I didn't start earning money within a week, I would be kicked out. And, of course, a week later, when I still hadn't found a job, my father kept his word. At first, my parents simply ignored me when I told them I couldn't find a job. I didn't know that they were already preparing for my official departure. I was shocked when Child Protective Services came to our house. My parents said they could no longer take care of me and asked them to take me to a children's home or shelter. The social workers came to check whether my parents were telling the truth or if this was just a way to get rid of their child. I listened as my parents complained about hard times and said that it was difficult for them to feed me and my brother. They said they could only take care of one child. After they said that, the social workers said that before placing me in an orphanage, they would first check whether my parents' relatives were willing to take me in. My father immediately said that he had one living relative, his cousin, Uncle Jeff, who lived in the city. However, he immediately began to make excuses, saying that he hadn't seen him in many years and wasn't sure if he could take me in. He claimed that the last time he heard from his uncle was 7 years ago and that he was allegedly in dire straits at the time. But he hadn't called him in all those years and didn't know his real situation. The truth is that Uncle Jeff might have been able to help me, but did he want to? My parents knew that he probably wouldn't want to. Uncle Jeff used to live with us. He went to college despite his father's protests, who still considers education a waste of time. I remember how my father constantly argued with him, accusing him of being lazy. Jeff graduated from college and wanted to continue his studies, but he didn't have any money, so he started looking for a job, but without success. My father got angry and then simply kicked him out of the house, saying he couldn't feed him anymore. Uncle Jeff tried to explain that he was doing everything he could, but my father stood his ground. He accused him of wasting time and money on his education. In the end, Uncle Jeff left for the city and has not returned since. And now I have a question. If you were in Uncle Jeff's shoes, would you agree to take in the son of the man who once kicked you out and never once asked about your life over the years? Social workers promised to contact him and find out his answer. I'm worried because I think my uncle won't want to take me in, and then I'll be sent to an orphanage. I think I'll find out my fate soon. So write in the comments whether you would agree to take in such a child, and we'll move on to the update. Update 1. It's been several years since I promised to keep you posted, and I apologize for the long silence. Too many things have happened in my life. I am now 19. Social workers informed my parents that my uncle had agreed to take me in. My parents were as surprised as I was because they were sure that Uncle Jeff would respond to their cruelty with the same indifference. However, they were even glad that they would finally be rid of me. As they waited for the day when social workers would take me to my uncle, my parents kept saying that since I had chosen Jeff's path, I would end up just like him, with no one. Their words weighed heavily on me, but everything changed when I went to live with my uncle. On the day I was taken away, the only one who was genuinely upset by my departure was my younger brother Toby. He ran after me, hugged me, and cried, begging me not to leave. I could not describe the pain I felt then. I cried too. My parents did not intervene while the Child Protection Services were there so as not to give themselves away. They just said it would be better for everyone. But I knew that Toby would definitely get it from my father that day. I was nervous on the way to my uncle's house. Uncle Jeff seemed happy to see me, but I didn't believe he cared. I thought he just wanted to make a good impression on the social workers. But when they left and I was alone with my uncle, everything turned out to be completely different. He exclaimed that I looked like a walking skeleton and immediately went to the kitchen to prepare me something to eat. When he placed the plate in front of me, I realized that I had never eaten anything tastier in my life. If this was what failure in life looked like, as my parents said, then I was happy to be a failure. I ate everything in 5 minutes, but without waiting for me to ask for seconds, my uncle served me more. After that, he sent me to bed, and then we talked for a long time. When I told him everything that had happened, he just shook his head. My uncle said that if it weren't for Child Protective Services, my parents would have simply thrown me out on the street. But they could have been held accountable for that, which is why they decided to do everything by the book. Uncle Jeff immediately sent me to school. He didn't have any children, and after several failed relationships, he lost interest in marriage. He said that he might consider surrogacy in the future, but for now he was focused on work and making money. 2 years passed, but my parents never once tried to find out how I was doing. I didn't expect it, but Uncle Jeff was outraged by their behavior. One day, he decided to visit them and took me with him. Since his car was broken, we took a taxi. When we arrived, everyone was home, the parents and Toby. Toby opened the door. He was so happy to see me, but he didn't show it, fearing his parents' reaction. He just smiled silently and let us into the house. My mother was the first to speak, her voice full of mockery and contempt. She asked if my uncle was tired of having me as a burden. This question struck me as if I were an unwanted suitcase that everyone just wanted to get rid of. Fortunately, Uncle Jeff didn't stay silent. He told my parents that he had only brought me along so they could see how much better I looked without them. In his opinion, this proved their complete failure as parents. My father replied that he could only see one thing, that I was consuming my uncle's resources. He said that if we had nothing important to say, we could leave. My uncle called him shameless and signaled for me to leave. We left, but I felt heavy-hearted. I saw Toby, but he didn't say a word. I knew that my parents had already turned him against me, and now he kept his distance. I am 19 now, I am in college, but I am seriously worried about my younger brother Toby, because as long as he lives with our parents, he has no chance of normal future. Update 2. It's been 3 weeks since Uncle Jeff and I visited my parents, but yesterday I went to see them again. After our last visit, I felt very depressed, and my uncle quickly noticed it. As soon as he asked what was wrong, I immediately poured out everything that was on my mind. I told him the reason for my condition. Toby always dreamed of a better life, but he would never be able to achieve it while living with his parents. To do so, he needed to study, but his parents were categorically opposed to school. What's more, my relationship with my brother was becoming increasingly strained, and I couldn't accept that. My uncle agreed that Toby's situation was difficult, but as long as he lived with his parents, nothing could be changed. I thought that if the problem was that Toby lived with them, then the solution was simple. Take him in. I was sure that my parents would easily agree because they once wanted to get rid of me too. But Uncle Jeff anticipated this, and before I could suggest this plan, he said that the problem was not that he couldn't or didn't want to take Toby, but that his parents would not agree to give him up. I insisted on trying anyway, and he said I could try, but he himself had no intention of communicating with my parents anymore. I went to see him yesterday, and as expected, they were not happy about my visit. My mother wasn't home, only my father and Toby. I said I had come to talk about my brother. I wanted him to move to the city and go to school. His father looked at me silently for 2 minutes, then asked a question. Do you think I don't care about my son's future? The answer was obvious, but I didn't want to provoke a conflict, so I calmly said that I just wanted Toby to choose his own destiny. My father instantly flew into a rage, shouting that his opinion was more important than Toby's wishes. There it was, true parental tyranny. He didn't even think about the fact that his brother was standing nearby and heard every word. Now Toby is 15, and his father is repeating the same scenario with him that he did with me. He had already forced him to drop out of school, and was preparing him for a life that Toby had not chosen for himself. I don't know where I got the courage, but I am grateful to myself for telling it like it is. I told my father that by forcing Toby to follow his dreams, he would only sow hatred in him. My father just smiled contemptuously and said that, on the contrary, Toby would be grateful for it in the future. At that moment, my brother couldn't take it anymore and started to cry. My father looked at him, then turned to me and told me to get out and never come back to his house again. I got up and left. Aunt Jeff was right. I'm not going to give up and let my parents ruin Toby's life like they tried to do to me. Toby is 15 now, which means that in 3 years he will be able to make his own decisions and will no longer be obliged to obey his parents. I just hope that by then he won't break down and accept their sick worldview as the norm. Update 3. I am now 21 years old. From a financial point of view, I can be called successful, but despite this, I feel incredibly heavy-hearted as I write these lines. You may be wondering how I achieved this in just 2 years. 2 years is enough time for your life to turn upside down, isn't it? I'm joking, because in reality, none of this is my doing. My net worth exceeds $500,000, but I didn't do anything special to achieve it. I just lived with my Uncle Jeff and tried to forget that I ever had parents. Everything was going smoothly until I began to notice that my uncle was feeling worse. I was worried, but when I asked him about it, he assured me that everything was fine. His words were reassuring until one day he started talking about how important it was to stay strong even when you were alone. It seemed strange, but I didn't think much of it. Then he asked me what I would do if I inherited his entire fortune. I began to tell him how I would set up a scholarship fund for rural children who don't have the opportunity to study. While I was talking, he started coughing. I rushed to get a glass of water, but when I returned, I saw that his palm was covered in blood. I realized that the situation was much more serious than I had thought. When the coughing fits subsided a little, I insisted that he go to the hospital immediately, but he just calmly said that everything had already been decided. Then he confessed that he had stage 4 lung cancer. He had been undergoing treatment, but the disease had only progressed. And then he said the worst thing. The doctors had given him only a few months to live. I was ready to give anything to save him, but he just shook his head. He had already been to other clinics, and they all said the same thing. From that day on, like every hour was torture for me, because I knew we had little time left. When he was admitted to the hospital, he began to put his affairs in order. I told him that I wanted to inform his parents about his condition. He forbade me to do so. They had turned their backs on him while he was alive, and now that he was dying, he didn't want to see them. Then he said he was leaving me all his property. I thought it was just the house and some small savings, but he confessed that he had over $500,000 and it was all mine now. But at that moment, I didn't care. I went against his last wish and called my parents. I couldn't help but try. My father didn't answer, so I dialed my mother. She heard my voice, snorted irritably, and handed the phone to my father. He answered briefly. Yes? I knew I only had a few seconds to explain why I was calling. I started to say that Uncle Jeff was seriously ill and in the hospital. Before I could say that he only had a few weeks to live, my father exploded. He yelled that after my uncle and I had disrespected him, I was now calling to ask him for money. But the worst was yet to come. He said that even if Uncle Jeff and I were both dying, he wouldn't give us a penny of his money. This man was a monster. If only I had listened to my uncle and not called them. I wanted to find a peaceful way, but their selfishness was just unbearable. I hung up the phone. Uncle Jeff died this week. We talked about how I had to be strong when it happened, but it turned out that it was impossible to prepare for something like that. Update 4. I disobeyed Uncle Jeff by telling my parents about his illness, but they shouldn't have known about his death. My father himself said that he didn't care if I died or my uncle died, so they didn't deserve to be part of this. I had never organized even a party in my life, let alone a funeral, but fortunately, everything worked out on its own. I told his loved ones, and they took it upon themselves to organize a dignified farewell. On the day of the funeral, there was not a single relative there to support me. My uncle was not just an uncle to me, he was like a father and mother to me. He was not a religious man, so the ceremony was not held in a church, but in a funeral home, where his last wish was fulfilled. Cremation. When it was time to say goodbye, I was the first to approach the coffin. Uncle Jeff lay there as if he were simply asleep. I wanted to pay any amount of money if only it would all turn out to be a dream. I couldn't hold back any longer and burst into tears like a child. I went to a corner and tried to collect my thoughts, but suddenly I heard a familiar voice. Someone said that my uncle was a kind soul. I turned around and saw my parents. They were standing among my uncle's friends, pretending to be close to him. My pain instantly turned to rage, and I headed toward them. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew one thing. They shouldn't be here. When I approached, my mother asked with feigned confusion why I hadn't told him about my uncle's death. I replied that he himself would not have wanted to see them at his funeral. Then I asked them to leave. My mother said that I had no right to decide who could be there. At that moment, I was called. It was time for the cremation. I left my parents without an answer and went to do what my uncle had asked. When it was all over, I thanked everyone for coming and invited them to my house for a bite to eat. I was already talking to the guests when my parents entered the house. They were amazed at how nice it was. They clearly did not expect that my uncle could build such a house himself. Coming up to me, my father asked if it was really his house. I calmly got up from the sofa, looked at them, and said that Uncle Jeff had indeed built this house, but now it was mine. My mother didn't believe me and asked me what I meant. I confirmed that my uncle had left me everything, including $500,000. Their faces froze, but while they were trying to find the right words, I coldly said, "Now get out of my house." The guests were in shock. My father began to protest, saying that they were still my parents and I had no right to treat them that way. But I called security and demanded that they be thrown out. I'm sure Uncle Jeff would have smiled if he had seen them being shamefully thrown out of my house. I apologized to the guests for the little scene and assured them that this was exactly what my uncle would have wanted. I will soon change my name. Toby is now 17, and next year I will try to convince him to move in with me so that my parents can live out their worthless lives in complete solitude. Thank you to everyone who supported me and listened to my story. So that's where the story ends. The author hasn't written any more updates. Write in the comments what you think about all this. Personally, I think the author did absolutely the right thing. The parents are jerks. And Toby, well, when you live in such a toxic environment with parents like that, you can easily get the impression that everything is fine. But I think Toby should definitely take his brother's side, listen to him, and change his life. At least I really hope he listens to his brother. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Check out our previous videos, which will appear here. And good luck!